Start. So I'd like to welcome everyone here to this weekend shamatha retreat based on the practice of observing the mind. So to help improve the flow of the sessions, again, if we can make sure that everyone has their webcam switched off and their microphones switched off as well at the beginning of each session. This this weekend retreat is second of in a series of 5 retreats. The first one we did 3 weeks ago. And these series of 5 retreats are covering 3 core areas of practice of mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. So these first 2 retreats, the one we've just done 3 weeks ago and this weekend, shamatha retreat, is within the context of mindfulness, of developing our attention skills. Then in 3 weeks' time, we'll have a compassion retreat. And then following that, we'll have 2 retreats, 2 Vipassana retreats, covering the wisdom aspect of the practice. And the upcoming retreats, I'll speak a little bit more about the content of those in the last session tomorrow. So the retreat structure for this weekend is the same as last retreat. We're having 4 sessions today and 4 sessions tomorrow. And based on the Central European summertime, we see the times of the 4 sessions here. So each session is 1 hour 15 long. And after this first session, we have a 30-minute break. Then the second session, then we have 1 hour for lunch. Then the third session after lunch from 1 till 2:15, another 30-minute break, and then 2:45 till 4 p.m. Is the 4th session. And we see here the topics that we're going to cover, the main topics in each of those 4 sessions in each day. So we'll begin with an introduction in this session. Then the first of the 2 main shamatha practices we'll spend the next 2 sessions on, that is observing thoughts. And so observing emotions is a variation of that. And then in the last session today, we'll begin the second of the 2 main practices of resting in awareness. Continue that in the first session tomorrow. And then in the following 2 sessions, we're going to combine these 2 practices of resting in awareness, observing thoughts, in a practice called stillness in motion. So we'll have 2 sessions on that. And then the last session integrating into daily life. The session structure will be the same for each one. We'll start with a guided meditation. Then I'll give a presentation regarding the practice that we're doing, another guided meditation, and then we'll finish with question answer. Now for question answer, you can do one of 2 things. For the question answer, you can either, at the time of the question answer at the end of the session, you can either switch on your webcam and mic and ask directly, or if you prefer not to be videoed, you can write your question in the chat box during the session, and then Martina will read out your question at the end of the session. So you can use either method you prefer. The recommended reading for this retreat is the same as last one, and that is The Attention Revolution from Alan Wallace. That's his book on the shamatha practice. So a lot of the things that we're covering in this retreat are covered very well in his book. The retreat materials, hopefully you've got a copy of those 2 charts, a diagram and then a chart. We started to look at these 2 diagrams, the chart and the diagram, in the last retreat 3 weeks ago. We looked at the first 4 stages of progress. And so what we're going to do here tomorrow in session 2 and 3 is we're going to go back to that color diagram, review those first 4 stages of progress to shamatha, and then we'll complete that diagram, and we'll use that chart there to help support that. So if you have those available, particularly for tomorrow, that would be very, very helpful. So let's begin now the first session, an introduction. And so this session will go till 10:15, so an hour 15 session. And to begin, we'll begin with a meditation, a very short meditation, where we begin with just simply settling our body, speech, and mind to put ourselves in a good state for this retreat, and then also to set the motivation. So if you'd like to find a nice comfortable posture, let's begin with that. And as I did last retreat, I'll switch off my webcam during the meditations so not to distract you in your meditations. As an act of loving kindness for yourself, allow your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. And bringing your awareness to the area of your face and softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. The mouth and jaw, soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed. In this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And then we can take 3 slow, deep breaths, maintaining awareness of sensations throughout the body as you breathe. And then allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. And then give yourself permission to let go of any hopes or fears, worries or concerns about the past or the future. to give yourself permission to let go of all of these things for the duration of this short meditation. And simply allow the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Allowing the mind to be relaxed, still, and clear. And then think about your motivation for attending this weekend retreat. And then setting the best possible motivation you can for attending this retreat. And try to include others in your motivation as well. And then keeping this motivation in mind, we can slowly end this meditation and begin our discussions together here today. Let's have a look at what points we'll be covering in this session. And as part of the introduction, we'll begin by looking at what is shamatha, why is shamatha practice important, and how to train in shamatha. And those of you who attended in the last retreat, this will be a very good review to remind you of these points. And then we'll be looking at what's called bare attention. And we'll be doing a meditation regarding that. And that will sort of lead us into the first of the two shamatha practices that we're going to be covering this weekend, that is observing thoughts. So this is going to give us a little taste of that. And then there'll be time for some question answer at the end of the session. So let's begin the introduction. First, what is shamatha? Now, shamatha is a Sanskrit word, and when Buddhism first spread from India, it spread through two languages, Pali and Sanskrit. And here we're basing this weekend retreat on the Sanskrit tradition. And so this word shamatha, we can divide into two parts. The first part, shama, means calm, a mind that is calm, not discursive, not full of thoughts. And ta means to remain or abide. So shamatha is often translated as calm abiding, meaning not only a mind that is calm, but it's abiding single-pointedly on an object. So we're talking about single-pointed concentration. So shamatha is the practice of cultivating a calm, clear, and focused mind. And it's a particular level of concentration we're cultivating. And in this discussion, there's another Sanskrit word that you'll often see, and that is the word samadhi. And so the sam prefix here means totally, And D means to place, to place. So it means to totally place the mind. And this is often translated as concentration. And so it's a general term meaning concentration in general. So there are many levels of samadhi or concentration we can cultivate. The one that we are focusing on here in this retreat, and we did in the last retreat as well, is a level of samadhi called shamatha. And this one is the one that's most emphasized in what's called the Mahayana Buddhist traditions. Whereas in the Theravada Buddhist traditions, based on the Pali scriptures, they talk often about these 4 levels of jhana, but it's also just another level of samadhi or concentration. Why is shamatha practice important? In terms of everyday life, shamatha practice is helping us to improve our attention skills. And if we can improve our attention skills, then we'll be much more effective in everything we do. We'll have much better mental balance, meaning we'll have much less stress and agitation and craving and so forth arising due to that mental balance. We'll also become the masters of our mind, whereas now many of us in the modern world tend to be the slaves of our mind. We're often tormented and overwhelmed by our thoughts, emotions, memories, and so forth. And so this shamatha practice is really going to help us to really become the masters of our mind. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later in this retreat. Also, by improving our attention skills, you'll find that you'll enjoy simple pleasures in life much more than we do now. And also, it often translates into sleep and health benefits, that with a distracted, agitated mind, we often have sleep difficulties, and often we have some physical health problems. So by improving attention skills, we often have those physical health benefits. But here, of course, in a deeper level, this shamatha practice is very important in terms of the pursuit of happiness. And here, this quote from His Holiness Dalai Lama, which we quoted in the last retreat, again, we'll quote here. And he says, "I believe that the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. Whether one believes in religion or not, whether one believes in this religion or that religion, we are all seeking something better in life. So I think the very motion of our life is towards happiness." So shamatha practice is a crucial part of the pursuit of happiness. But what do we mean by happiness? And here we can talk about at least 2 types of happiness. The first is what's called temporal happiness, which is simply another name for our pleasurable experiences. So this is a stimulus-based happiness. We have a stimulus, and from that we have a pleasant experience. So therefore, it's often called conditioned happiness, meaning we need certain conditions, certain stimulus to come together for us to have this happiness experience. So therefore, this type of happiness, by its nature, is transient. It's unsustainable, because when the stimulus finishes, the happiness finishes. It's unreliable, meaning if we don't have the stimulus, we have no pleasure, we have no happiness. We can't just click our fingers and have a happiness experience whenever we want one. And if we look closely at our pleasurable experiences, we'll see they're not really even in the nature of happiness. Because if our pleasant experiences were in the nature of happiness, it would mean the more we engaged in them, the more happy we should become. But we know from our own experience that if we overindulge in our pleasant experiences, not only don't they make us more happy, often they induce a lot of unnecessary suffering. Again, the classic example is eating too much of our favorite dessert. We just get stomachache, or staying too long out in the nice warm sunshine. So they're just simply relative experiences. And this type of happiness is all about what we can get from the world. And therefore, the world does not really appear very user-friendly, because there's often a lot of unpleasant things, stimulus coming our way. So there's a lot of unpleasant things out there. So the world doesn't really appear very user-friendly with this perspective of happiness. Whereas we can also talk about genuine happiness, a state of inner well-being that is not stimulus-based, meaning that we can have this genuine happiness or inner well-being without any particular stimulus being present. Therefore, it's called unconditioned happiness. Therefore, by its nature, it is stable, it's sustainable, it's reliable, and it is in the nature of happiness. And this type of happiness is more about what we can bring to the world rather than what we can get from the world. And so from this perspective, the world appears as user-friendly because we can always bring something to the world. Even if we are faced with unpleasant things, we can bring a lot of good things to the world. Now, one thing we do is we tend to mistake pleasure for genuine happiness, that we hope that our pleasurable experiences are going to satisfy us and fulfill us. And so because of that, then we end up with a lot of craving and attachment for our pleasant experiences, trying to hold on them and trying to make them last and make us happy. And though with craving and attachment, of course, comes worry and anxiety about not getting it, not getting enough of it, or losing them, those things. Also, when frustration when we don't get it, overindulging when we do get it, and then often a lot of dissatisfaction and disappointment when things don't live up to our expectations. And then often it leads to more craving because we feel like we're not fully satisfied because we just didn't get enough of it. So we crave more and more and more. And then due to that craving and attachment, what happens is we actually stop enjoying the things we used to enjoy. And we know this well from our own experience. If there are certain things we really enjoy and we get them too often, then after some time, craving and attachment says, well, sorry, not good enough anymore. That's boring. I need something bigger, better, and different. So craving and attachment's never satisfied, always looking for something bigger, better, and different. Now, if we don't mistake pleasure for genuine happiness, and we understand there are these two types of happiness, then we can strive for the genuine happiness, the inner well-being, and at the same time actually enjoy pleasurable experiences more fully, because we'll let go of that craving and attachment to them, understanding they're never going to fulfill us and satisfy us, and thereby actually enjoy them more. So it's not really a choice, either choose pleasure or genuine happiness. That if we strive for genuine happiness as a byproduct, we'll actually enjoy the simple pleasures in life more than we do now. But how do we achieve this genuine happiness, and what role does shamatha play in that? And so here we have a quote from the Buddha. He says, "Find out what really constitutes true well-being, and based on this understanding, pursue it." And so what we find in the Theravada Buddhist traditions, based on the original scriptures in Pali, that the practices that we need to engage in to achieve this genuine happiness, inner well-being, is often presented as the Noble Eightfold Path. Whereas in the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, based on the Sanskrit scriptures, the texts, the presentation is one of the 6 perfections, 6 practices. Now, whether we are talking about the Noble Eightfold Path or the 6 perfections, in both those areas, both of those can be condensed down into 3 core areas of practice called the 3 higher trainings. And they are ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And so let's see how the Noble Eightfold Path and the 6 perfections condense down into those 3. So the Noble Eightfold Path, we have right speech, right action, and right livelihood can be subsumed as ethics. And then we have right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This can be subsumed as concentration. And then there's right view and right thought, which can be subsumed as wisdom. And in the 6 perfections, the first 3 are generosity, ethics, and patience, and they can be subsumed as ethics. Then we have joyous effort. The 5th one is concentration. The 6th is wisdom. And joyous effort is something we need to apply to all 3. So we see in all Buddhist traditions, the 3 core areas of practice are ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So it's on the basis of ethics that we engage in the concentration or shamatha practice. And it's on that basis that we engage in the wisdom, or sometimes called vipassana practice. And we see this in the diagram that we're going to be looking at tomorrow, this color diagram at the top. In the middle is showing the shamatha, the person, the meditator flying through the sky and riding on the elephant of the mind. So that is describing shamatha, and we'll look at the symbolism of that tomorrow in session 7, I think it is. The third session tomorrow, or the 7th session for the weekend. But then the diagram right in the top right-hand corner is the wisdom practice, vipassana practice. And there, what's written, translating the Tibetan that's on that diagram, it says, the root of samsara is cut by the union of shamatha and vipassana observing emptiness. So the Buddhist assertion is that the root cause of our mental afflictions and suffering is our distorted view of reality. And here in the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, that distorted view of reality, which is what one of the topics we're going to look at in the later Vipassana retreat, is grasping onto an independent me, independent world. And so we are to come to realize there's no independent me, no independent world. That's what emptiness means. And so by gaining this insight into reality, that everything is interdependent, nothing exists independently, we can overcome all mental afflictions and suffering and thereby achieve this genuine happiness and inner well-being. But to be able to gain a direct insight into emptiness, a direct insight into the nature of reality, we need a very stable, clear, focused mind. We need the mind of shamatha. Anything less than that, we won't be able to fully penetrate the nature of reality, and thereby we won't be able to achieve genuine happiness. So shamatha is the basis of vipassana. And so we need to unify those two in the vipassana practice to be able to achieve this genuine happiness and well-being. So this is why the shamatha practice is so important, that if we really want to achieve that genuine happiness, that inner well-being, we need shamatha as a basis for that vipassana practice. How do we train in shamatha? As we looked at in the earlier retreat 3 weeks ago, the first point there is prerequisites in terms of how to set up our life in such a way to support this shamatha practice. And this is something we'll look at a little bit more detail in the last session tomorrow. But just very briefly here, first point here, and these are what's called the 6 prerequisites. The first point is a supportive environment. And there, one of the most important things is to have like-minded friends. And we'll look at the importance of that in, again, the last session tomorrow. And then few desires and being content is with respect to material things, because if we're continually chasing after wealth and material possessions, that's not going to be very conducive to doing this sort of practice. Few activities means to simplify our life, so we have time and space and energy to do this practice. Ethical discipline, we saw that ethics is really not only the basis of shamatha, but I think ethics is the basic basis of any sort of meaningful lifestyle. And then last point is to let go of compulsive thinking, because as long as we're caught up in obsessive compulsive thinking, then of course it's going to be very difficult to develop this single pointed concentration. Again, we'll look at those 6 prerequisites in a little bit more detail in the last session tomorrow. There's a very good presentation of these 6 prerequisites in Alan Wallace's Attention Revolution on page 49 to 55. So if you have that book, that would be helpful to read those pages. Now, in terms of actual shamatha practice, then any practice we do always has 2 parts: meditation and what we do outside of meditation. So what we do outside of meditation here, integrating into daily life, we'll look at that in session 8. And in terms of any meditation, there are also always 2 parts. There's preparation and actual meditation. First, preparation is to how to prepare ourselves well at the beginning of a session in terms of preparing body, speech, and mind. And we'll look at that shortly in the next slide. We'll review that. We covered that in a lot of detail in the previous retreat. And then in terms of the actual shamatha meditation, 4 topics that we went through in the last retreat, and we'll review here, is what qualities are we cultivating in this practice? And here we mentioned relaxation, stability, clarity. Again, we'll look at those in a little bit more detail shortly. What objects should we use for this practice? What tools do we use in the practice? We'll look at that in the next session. We'll review that in the next session. What faults can come up in this practice and how do we overcome them? We'll also review that in the next session. And then stages of progress. And so we have this color shamatha chart that we're going to be looking at in terms of stages of progress in session 6 and 7. But also in session 3 this afternoon, we're going to be looking at a different model, a 4-stage model that we particularly use with the practice that we'll be doing this weekend. So we'll look at that in session 3 this afternoon. So preparation. How to prepare ourselves well at the beginning of each meditation session. And preparation is very important because often what people do is when they sit down to meditate, they just sit down and start meditating, and then they wonder why things don't go very well. It's because we didn't really prepare ourselves well at the beginning of a meditation session. In terms of preparing body, we're really talking about setting up a good posture. And the 2 most important points with posture is to keep the back straight. So that is what it means here by vigilance, and to allow the entire body to be completely relaxed, releasing any tension. And then once we've set up a good posture, then keep the body as still as possible, avoiding any unnecessary movement. And that's what's meant here by stillness. Preparing speech here is about inner speech or mental speech, chit-chat. And here what we do is we simply allow the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. The breath and the thoughts have a very close relationship. And simply by allowing the breathing to settle down, that tends to have a very settling effect on our thoughts, on our inner speech. And so this is a segue into preparing the mind. By just simply allowing the breathing settle, that tends to settle the mind. And in terms of settling the mind, again, like the body, to let the mind come into a state of relaxation, into the present moment, into that stillness of the present moment, and having the mind in a clear state. So simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. And so if we prepare body, speech, and mind in this way, then from that basis, we can effectively enter into the actual practice. And here in the actual shamatha practice, in the meditation texts, normally 2 qualities are mentioned as what we are to cultivate. That is stability and clarity. To cultivate a stable mind, to be able to focus on an object without becoming distracted, but also to be able to focus on the object in a very clear way to overcome dullness. But as we did in the last retreat, and emphasize again in this retreat, is adding that quality of relaxation that often is not mentioned in those old meditation texts. Because I think in centuries previous, people were very relaxed generally and didn't need to be emphasized, this quality of relaxation. But for us in the modern world, who tend to have very hectic, fast-paced lives, our minds tend to be very agitated, quite chaotic. And therefore, whenever we focus on anything in our life, we tend to apply quite a lot of tension when we focus. And that's what we bring to meditation. When we try and focus on an object here, we bring that tension, and then we have all sorts of problems in meditation. So the very first thing we need to do in any meditation practice, but particularly this shamatha practice, is first we need to relax, relax, relax. Because it's only on the basis of relaxation that we can cultivate any sort of sustainable stability and clarity. And here the analogy is, we looked at the analogy of a tree, that first we need to sink these deep roots of relaxation to be able to support the strong trunk of stability. The stronger the trunk of stability, the higher the branches and leaves of clarity can grow. So we emphasize these qualities in this order, and that's what we did in the last retreat. And again, there'll be a big emphasis on relaxation in this weekend retreat. And then in terms of objects, we saw in the attention revolution, Alan Wallace recommended 3 particular objects. And so he says again, to guide meditators along these 10 stages, which is this 9-stage model plus the result of shamatha we can see here in that color diagram, I have chosen from Buddhist teachings 3 techniques that I have found effective for people in the modern world. For achieving the first 4 stages, I recommend mindfulness of breathing. And so that's what we covered in the last retreat, the variations of that practice. And for most or many of us, that will probably be the best object to use. And then beginning with the 5th stage, I recommend a method called settling the mind in its natural state. So that's the name he gives to the practice that we'll be doing in the next couple of sessions. And that is simply observing the mind, or in other words, observing our thoughts. And then he says, with the instructions from the 8th attentional stage onward, we move on to the still subtler practice of maintaining awareness of awareness itself. The technique is called shamatha, without an object. So that's the practice. The second of the main practices this weekend will begin in the last session today and continue tomorrow morning. And there we saw also in the last retreat that from the past masters, they all in agreement saying that if involuntary thoughts particularly dominate your behavior, then focus the mind in mindfulness of exhalation and inhalation of the breath. So that accounts for most of us in the modern world. We tend to be caught up in a lot of obsessive compulsive thinking all the time. So therefore, the advantages of mindfulness of breathing is it helps to get us out of that obsessive compulsive thinking mind into the body and get out of the past and the future into the present moment, because most of our thinking is about the past and the future, whereas the sensations of the breath only happen in the present moment. And also the breath is readily available, and compared to other objects, it's relatively easy to focus on. As many of you will find in this weekend retreat, that many of you will probably find that observing the mind and resting in the awareness is more difficult, more challenging than focusing on the breath. But of course, a lot of benefits, which we'll look at shortly. And we looked at those in the last retreat, those 3 variations of mindfulness of breathing. We began with the full body breath practice, very good for relaxation. Then we moved to focusing on the abdomen, very good for improving stability of attention. And then we moved to focusing at entrance of the nostrils, very good for improving clarity of attention. And so that brings us to the meditation that we're going to be doing now, and that is what's called bare attention. So with shamatha practice, we are observing the object directly. And so here we'll introduce this idea from a sutra from the Buddha, where he says, Bahir, so Bahir is a disciple of his, he says, you should train thus, yourself thus. In the seen, let there be only the seen. In the heard, let there be only the heard. In the sensed, let there be only the sensed. In the cognized, let there be only the cognized. And so what we find is, of course, we have 6 domains of experience. That we have the 5 sense objects in terms of we experience visual objects, sounds, smells, taste, and tactile objects, but also the mental domain. We experience mental objects such as thoughts, emotions, memories, and mental images, and so forth. And so what we're going to do in this meditation is to give a little taste of this observing thoughts practice, which we're going to introduce in detail next session, is we're going to cycle through some of these domains mentioned here by the Buddha to really emphasize this bare attention, to observe the object directly. So by bare attention, we are meaning not conceptualizing, not imagining, not projecting, not visualizing, simply observing the object directly. And so we're going to begin with the senses. So first, we're going to begin with the, as mentioned here, the visual field. So we're going to be simply opening our eyes and observing the visual field in front of us. And as the Buddha recommended, in the scene, let there be only the scene, meaning simply observe the colors and shapes that are arising, that are appearing in front of you without labeling, without projecting, without conceptualizing. And then we'll turn our attention to the auditory field, the sounds that appear in the auditory field. And again, without labeling and projecting and imagining, simply observe those sounds directly. Then we'll move into the body, into the tactile field. And again, observing the tactile sensations in the body without visualizing, without imagining, without projecting, and so forth. Then lastly, we'll turn our attention to the mental field. And that is the field that of this weekend that we will observe, the mental field. And that field is where all of our thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images arise. And again, with bare attention, observing those mental events directly, observing our thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images directly, without projecting and imagining and so forth. So we'll cycle through those fields, and then we'll get a little taste of observing this mental field, which is going to be the object of our focus for this weekend's retreat. So if you'd like to find a nice comfortable posture, let's begin that practice. We begin by preparing the body, setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. A vigilant posture is to simply keep the back nice and straight. And then at the same time, allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. Mouth and jaw, soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed. And having established a good posture, allowing the body to remain as still as possible, avoiding any unnecessary movement. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Relaxed, still, and clear. Now, whilst remaining in that quiet, meditative state, open your eyes and bring your attention to the visual field in front of you, the field within which shapes and colours are appearing. And without conceptualizing, without labeling, that is, with bare attention, simply observe the colours and shapes appearing in the visual field. And in the scene, let there be only the scene. Now close your eyes and bring your attention to the auditory field, the field within which sounds are appearing. And without conceptualizing, without labeling, without projecting, simply observe the sounds appearing in that field. And in the heard, let there be just the heard. And now bring your attention to the field of the body, the field within which tactile sensations are arising. And without visualizing the body, without imagining the body, simply with bare attention, observe the tactile sensations within the body. And in the sensed, let there be just the sensed. Now allow your eyes to be at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you. And now bring your attention to the mental field, the field within which thoughts, emotions, memories, and mental images arise. And again, with bare attention, simply observe the field of the mind and any mental events arising in that field. Observing any thoughts, emotions, mental images, or memories arising in the field of the mind. without following thoughts, without trying to get rid of thoughts. Simply observe them as they arise and pass. And we can bring the meditation to a close. So now we've got plenty of time for question answer. So if you prefer, if you have a question, you can switch on your webcam and your mic. Otherwise, you can write them in the chat and Martina will read them out. So whoever comes first.
Hi, Glenn, it's Martina. There's a question in the chat from Helga.
Sure.
At point 3, where you were explaining and going through the slide about how to train in shamatha,
Right.
you spoke about reducing the activities in our life.
Right.
And so Helga is asking, what do you mean with few activities?
Yeah. I often hear people, when they hear about, understand the benefits of meditation, then often I hear people say, oh, I'd like to meditate, but I don't have time to meditate. I never have time to meditate. I think that's never really a valid excuse. Now, the reality is that many of us have very busy lives, and we never have enough time for everything. Now, some of those activities are essential. Most of us probably need to work at some level to have enough finances for food and shelter and so forth. Some of us have family responsibilities, and some of us maybe have some other responsibilities. But above and beyond those essential activities that we do, we tend to fill up our day with lots of activities, lots of stuff. And we often do that for one of two reasons. One is that it's often, thought in our modern world that, if you're not doing something, you're not being productive. So therefore, if you're not doing something, just do something, be productive. So we tend to fill up our day for that reason. But also, if we're not doing anything, we're just sitting quietly there doing nothing, that really sort of forces us to look at the state of our mind, which is a bit of a mess. And so we tend to sort of busy ourselves, distract ourselves in activities so we don't have to look at the state of our mind. So we do fill up our day with lots of activities, but a lot of those activities are not very essential and often not very meaningful. And so we end up sort of tending to waste our life a lot because of that. Now, in terms of few activities to simplify our life, what we could do is try and forcibly cut things out of our life. But that's always going to be a struggle. What we really need to do is shift our priorities in life, because now often our priorities are sort of out there, based on this view that my happiness and suffering are coming from out there. And so we put a lot of energy into that, trying to manipulate the things around us and getting those things that seem to give us pleasure, trying to avoid those things that seem to give us pain and suffering and so forth. So we put a lot of time and energy into those sort of things, and they don't really bring us anything. In fact, what we saw is there that a lot of that trying to get the pleasant things just leads to a lot of craving, attachment, frustration, disappointment, and so forth. So therefore, what we need to do, and that's why I really emphasized in this first session, the importance, and that's something we're going to look at in more detail in the last session tomorrow, in terms of the prerequisites and in terms of supporting view, is that to really help simplify our life, we need to shift our perspective of life, to really appreciate that the source of our happiness and suffering is not out there anywhere, it lies within our own mind. And if we can make that shift, then I think what you'll find is that you'll see that a lot of these things that we fill up our day with are not bringing us anything, and often they bring us a lot of agitation and more problems. And so we'll simply lose interest in them because they're not going to contribute to our happiness and well-being. So we'll just simply lose interest in them, and then we'll focus on the important things, and therefore essential and important things in our life. Therefore, we'll have time and space and energy to not only meditate, but to develop ourselves as a person in that pursuit of genuine happiness. But that's a point that we'll be looking at in a little bit more detail in the last session tomorrow. So that's what it means by few activities. It's really just to shift our priorities, to really simplify our life, to focus on those things which are important and meaningful to us and to the people around us, of course.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other either chat questions, or maybe someone on video first we'll take? Is there someone on video that'd like to ask a question?
Yes, Glenn, I have a question. Mikkel.
Who's speaking?
Mikkel from Copenhagen.
Mikkel, yes.
Hey, good morning, Glenn. Thank you so much for this
Sure.
very clear introduction this morning. I have a question regarding the role of compassion in the 3 higher trainings and the Eightfold Path. I don't see it mentioned anywhere, and it's emphasized so often in the Buddhist path. So where does it fit in?
Sure. Yes. I mean, of course, ethics is also, within compassion as well, but we find that a lot of the preliminary practices, so these are the 3 core practices, but then we have a lot of the preliminary practices that are the basis for those. And there we find a lot of these 4 immeasurables. And certainly in terms of the Mahayana path, we talk a lot about cultivating bodhicitta and so forth. So these compassion practices are really the often called the central pillar of the path. They support the whole path. And the path then is the Noble Eightfold Path or the Six Perfections practices. So the compassion practices are really the support for that. Sometimes it's also explained in terms of the two main wings of practice are wisdom and compassion. So therefore, like a bird needs two wings to fly, we need these two wings of wisdom and compassion. But really the compassion is really the door of entry and the central support for all of these practices in terms of loving kindness, compassion, and so forth. And so therefore, there's a lot of attention placed on those practices because they give us really the direction for our whole practice, and they give us the what's the word I'm looking for, the direction for these practices.
Thank you.
So, sure. Okay. Any other questions?
Martina again. So there's a
Sure.
couple of more questions from the chat.
Sure.
We can take the first one from Ross, and her question
Sure.
is about if you could say a bit more where the perfection of joyous effort fits into the 3 higher trainings, please.
Yeah. So the joyous effort is something we need to apply to all 3 of those trainings. So that's the way it's explained. In terms of the 6 perfections, the first 3 are subsumed in ethics. The 5th is concentration. The 6th is wisdom. And then the 4th, joyous effort, is something we need to apply to all 3 areas of practice. So that's sort of covers, is included in all 3, is part of all 3. We need to have this joyous effort in terms of practicing ethics, practicing shamatha, practicing vipassana, and so forth. And that's something also I'll touch on again in the last session tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit more about that joyous effort and the importance of it in the last session tomorrow.
And then we have a question from Ralph, who says, I find it difficult with the hear what heard without labeling, as I immediately recognize the sound coming from a plane, a pigeon, a bee. How can I just hear?
Very good question. And that is, I think, one thing that we actually, if we do these sort of practices, we come to really see how much we project onto reality. And we don't even realize it. You know, we think in daily life, we think when we see something, we see it objectively or we hear it objectively. But as the question said, is what we do, like instantly we see something or hear something, conceptualization comes. We conceptualize, we project, and we often don't realize we're doing that. And we think we're seeing or hearing reality objectively, when in fact, and often these labeling and projections are often distorted, as we're going to see in the Vipassana retreat later, is a lot of this, where a lot of these conceptualizations and projections are distortions of actual reality. So it's very helpful to see the difference between actual direct perception and conceptualization, and same with hearing. But if we're doing a practice where we are observing a sense field, then just to notice the conceptualization or the projection, I mean, it will come because that is our strong habit. And when it comes, is to notice it and just let it go. Let it go, let it go, let it go. And just stay with the raw sense data, the color, shape, or the sound, or so forth. But it's a really good insight to have that insight when we do these practices, to really see how much we are projecting onto reality. And often our conceptualizations and projections are not in accord with reality. So that's very good. That's actually a good insight to see that even.
Glenn, building on that. Hi, it's Pamela here. Hi.
Hi, Pamela.
Just building on that, could you sort of go through that again with the thoughts? Because without conceptualizing, but the thoughts in themselves are concepts. So how can you observe them without there being a concept?
Because we're observing the concept directly. I mean, often when a thought comes, or an emotion comes, or a memory comes, or something, don't we make a story out of that? Don't we then often criticize ourselves for having those thoughts or having those things come up in our mind? We create a story on top of a story. Mm-hmm. And also what we're going to see later is there's a big difference between observing a thought and mindfully thinking. So we're not talking about mindfully thinking here. We're talking about observing a thought. For example, if I'm mindfully thinking about this pen, what am I focused on? The pen. If I'm observing a thought about the pen, what am I focused on? The thought. So we have a big difference of focus there. So when we are doing this practice, and this is going to come up in probably the next session or the one after, is observing thoughts is we don't have that habit. We identify with them, we get caught up in them. We get caught up in the contents of thoughts. And so what we're trying to do in this practice is to observe the thought itself. But again, not so easy, because our strong habit is soon as a thought or an image or a memory or something comes up, we identify with it, we get caught up in the contents. And so that's something we'll look at again in more detail, I think in the next session or the one after.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, sure. I think we've got time for one more question, if anyone has.
Hi, Glenn. Hi, can you hear me? It's
Yes,
Mervi Christina.
Hi.
Hi. This is my first weekend, so enjoying it very much. Thank you so much for doing these lovely teachings. So my question actually goes back to the very first question when the lady was asking about, how to practice, how to kind of like let go, because everybody keeps saying, I don't have a time to meditate, I don't have a time, I need to work, I need to do this and that. So my question is really, in addition, you said we need to shift our priorities and start simplifying our life. So could you give an example? How would one's life, let's imagine I could, basically, I live in this ideal day. How would it look like? How would I practice? how would it look like? Yeah.
Well, again, it's not like there is a standard formula, because everyone is different. So what is a meaningful life for one person may be completely different to a meaningful life for someone else. So how the day would look would be very different depending on the person. So what I'm suggesting is that instead of, and that's what people do, is they hear about, oh, you need to meditate 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening, or whatever. They hear some sort of recipe for that, and they go, okay, and then they try and cut things out to do that. Yeah. But that'll never work, because their priorities and their perspective of life hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. So what I'm suggesting is that if we work on changing our perspective of life particularly in terms of where is the source of my happiness and suffering? Is it out there or is it within myself? Mm-hmm. If you can make that shift, what you will find is that things will start to fall into place based on your own character and situation and so forth and place in life. There is no fixed, best way of setting up the day.
Mm-hmm.
But if we make that shift, then based on who we are, the situation of our life and so forth, those things will start to fall into place.
Yes.
And so that's the first step, is to really work on making that shift. And that's what we see in all Buddhist traditions, is in the beginning stages, in what's called the preliminary practices, before all of this shamatha, vipassana and all this sort of stuff. What you see is reflections such as precious human life, death, and the unsatisfactory nature of our pleasurable experiences. So if we reflect on the fact that we have a precious life, lots of opportunity, it's not going to last forever, and happiness is not going to be found out there, if we can really internalize, I mean, intellectually, we sort of know that, but that's not enough. That's not going to change anything. We need to internalize that. We need to experientially see the preciousness of this life, that experientially see that it's not going to last forever, and experientially see the source of my happiness is not out there anywhere. It's within my own mind. If we can do those shift, things will start to fall into place. And then you'll find, again, how your life, your day will simplify, will depend on us as an individual and many other factors. So that's better, rather than just not changing our perspective and trying to crowbar in more meditation, because then nothing's going to work. Nothing's going to change.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, let's leave it there. So let's take a break now for about 25 minutes. Come back at 10:45, so in 25 minutes, and we'll then introduce this first of the two main practices for this weekend, that is the observing thoughts. So we'll introduce that and practice that in more detail in the next session. So let's take a break, and I'll see you back in 20